Hey everybody, welcome to PC Perspective. I'm Ryan Shrout. You are here for a live stream. We're going to talk about the GTX 980 Ti, G-Sync, I don't know, I guess VR, some other stuff. We got a whole bunch of questions. Joining me, our good friend Tom Peterson.
Thank you.
Distinguished engineer.
Evidently.
I don't even
I'm going to change that.
See, we couldn't even bring ourselves to put that on your lower to say distinguished engineer.
That's good. That's good because I'm going for disgruntled.
Disgruntled engineer?
Yeah, but it doesn't
Demo
work
guy
out.
extraordinaire.
Yeah.
Here's Tom Peterson. So GTX 980 Ti launched last week.
Yes.
It's actually hard for me to believe that was only a week ago because it feels like so much stuff has happened.
And it's been so exciting for you.
It has been so exciting. And also just tons of other things going on.
Well, Computex time.
Computex time, right, exactly.
Yeah, just
so
a million things.
That was before Computex, and then we had like 9,000 news posts about Computex.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good idea to kind of come back. You were over there in Taiwan.
I was, just got back.
I was not in Taiwan.
Good for you.
I was here.
Good for you.
And,
so you're on the correct time zone.
Yeah. You still live in 12 hours ahead.
I'm on Taiwan time. Yeah.
Well, this will be fun then.
Yeah.
This will be interesting. Actually, the last stream we did, somebody was, they had come back from Europe, I think.
Really? And were they sleepy?
He was.
Nice.
But, you get energized.
I feel great. It's always good.
A couple large Diet Cokes.
Large Diet Cokes. We're good to go.
So let's just jump into it. We are going to have, like I said, we're going to go through. He's going to present a little information about each of those products we talked about.
We'll go quick. Show some demos.
Ti, G-Sync stuff. We've got a notebook here with G-Sync on it. We're also going to give away a product as I reach to the side. We have an EVGA GTX 980 Ti SC Superclocked Edition provided by NVIDIA and EVGA.
Yes.
For purposes of giving away to you guys. I'll go ahead and give you the URL. You're going to go to this website and you're going to fill out a form, pcper.com/980ti livestream. Now you don't all have to go there at once. It's not going to be first enters. It is going to break everything because I don't want you to break the site because people tend to do that when you have thousands of people.
Let's just go there over time.
You're going to answer a couple of questions. You get like a bonus entry if you're subscribed to us on Twitch and YouTube.
And it's a random drawing out of people that fill out the question correctly?
People that fill out the questions correctly, it will be a random drawing at the end over who draws that. And so now, two of the questions you probably already figured out the answers to. One of them will be resultant from watching the live stream. Let's just make sure that people
We're going to tell the answer to the third question on the live stream.
On the live stream.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So let's jump into it.
Hey, how late can they fill in that form? What's the cutoff?
I will tentatively we'll say before the end of the stream.
Okay, before the end of the stream.
However, if we have site issues, we might let it go to like an hour after the stream.
Okay, so while the stream's going, fill in the form.
Yeah,
or shortly.
We will definitely draw a winner before we post this on YouTube for on-demand viewing.
Perfect.
That way, people who are here live get the benefit of being able to win a $650 video card. So,
very nice card.
Pretty cool. Let's jump into it. So, 980 Ti, go.
Brand new part. Brand new device just came out. It's based on the GM200 chip, which is the same chip as Titan X, and it is slightly cut down. The clocks are about the same, so performance is amazing. It's amazing for 4K. If you look at 4K as an example, comparing GTX 980, which is this light green line, comparing that to 680, it's literally about 3 times faster for 4K because it's got bigger frame buffer and it just isn't organized for that. As you come down in resolution, the difference is more like 2x between GTX 980 Ti and 680. Now the reason I picked 680 is obviously because if you're looking to upgrade, you're going to upgrade from 680 or 780 Ti, which is, 680 is about 3 years old now.
So you're saying that users tend to stay within their previous GPU price class,
yes,
I guess.
And they tend to wait at this price range about 2.5 to 3 years. So if you're a 680 owner or a 780 Ti owner, now is the time, and 980 Ti is an incredible upgrade for those guys. Great performance for 4K. As a matter of fact, if you look at all the leading games like Witcher 3, Grand Theft Auto, Project Cars, at 4K with everything cranked up, we're seeing like 45 frames per second for 980 Ti. On Witcher 3, 61 on Grand Theft Auto, 47 on Project Cars. Pretty much 980 Ti will crush through any game at 4K. That's just the way to say it, right?
Yeah.
Now, the best thing to do for right now is to show a demo of that and maybe do a little overclocking. We've got...
sure, we'll talk over while we...
talk over, so I'm going to load that up.
A little demo here.
All right, so 980 Ti, why don't we talk a little bit about specs while we're loading stuff up?
So 980 Ti is 2,816 CUDA cores, which is a drop of 256 from Titan X.
Yes.
Right, so that's 2 SMMs. I think, of CUDA core difference. You have 6 gigs of RAM instead of 12 gigs of RAM.
Cut down the RAM a little bit.
Right.
Frame buffer.
Which is, it's half the memory. So a lot of people might think that that's going to be a dramatic hit in performance, but in reality and actual real-world testing, it's not really the case. Right? Even at 4K gaming, 6 gigs of memory is plenty. If you were one of those crazy people that has like 3 980 Ti's and you're trying to do 4K surround, how many of those people even exist?
Not many. But
maybe you could go beyond 6 gigs.
But it is an awesome experience when you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at here? We've got Grand Theft Auto 5 up.
Yes. All right, so we're going to do a little overclocking. This is using EVGA's latest version. They have a DX12 overlay, which we're running on Windows 10.
We're running on Windows 10.
We are running on Windows 10 because I'm going to show a demo a little bit later that is a DX12 demo.
Okay.
So, but right now this is a not a DX12 game, and we're looking at EVGA's precision. We're getting 1200 1.2 gig right out of the boot on GPU Boost. And your base clock, remember, is around 1,000. The boost clock, I think, is 1076 or so.
Yep.
Right in that. So you can see right away, just like all of our other GPU Boost 2 parts, we are throttling based primarily on temperature and on the voltage. You can go up to a peak voltage and that's it. And this part right now is voltage limited, running at 1.2. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the precision. The overlay here, a lot of people have not figured out all these little, there's a voltage limit, there's a OV max limit, and there's a power limit. There's also a temp limit. What these tell you is
they only have a value of 0 or 1.
0 or 1, and it tells you when you're overclocking which thing is kind of your limit. Okay. There's always going to be something that's limiting you. Either it's going to be voltage, or it's going to be temperature, it's going to be power. So it's nice to know which one is it right now. And as a matter of fact, right now on this guy, it is voltage limit, because you can see voltage limit set to 1. So that means, if I'm overclocking, the first thing I'm going to do is come over to the little over voltage slider, and I'm going to crank it up. So on this particular GPU, you can add 87 millivolts before you start violating long-term reliability stuff. So we did that, and right away our clock actually.
I don't know if you hit apply down there. Maybe.
Apply. Okay. There we go. There's apply. So it's up to now 12:15. So we got a nice little bump out of going there. But the next big thing you're going to do is come over to the frequency offset, and this is guaranteed not to break your card. You can play with it all you want.
It's not guaranteed not to crash your system.
It can crash your system, but you're not going to hurt your card.
Okay.
So go ahead and play with the overclocking stuff, play with the overvoltaging stuff, you get great results. So I'm going to add, I guess, around 137. I'm going to apply that. I'm also going to add around...
I don't think it actually clicked.
Oh, okay. Let's add like 328 on the memory. So the combination of more frequency clock, more memory. Now we're up to 1351 on the core clock, and we're at 3829 on the memory clock. And you can see we're still playing, just fine. Our temperatures are good. So I'm going to push it just a little bit more. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do it.
You always do this live overclocking stuff.
Here we go.
I give you credit for taking that chance.
What number do you think? Like 140, 151?
Nah, I'd say like 200.
200 on the overclock. 193. All right, GPU Boost, do your thing. Okay, didn't crash. And we're back. We're now up to our core clock of 1408. So we're getting 1.4 gig. It's still running. It's pretty good.
It's interesting to talk about it, right? Because your base clock is a gigahertz. That's what the GPU is rated at. And we're actively running at 1408.
1.4 gig, yeah.
Right, so you're talking about a 40% increase in clock speed.
That's right.
Why still
Why so much?
Many people will feel like you're holding back the GPU from some of its default states. Why that still is the case?
The way to think of it is kind of recapping GPU Boost 2. The base clock is the clock that we're guaranteed never to go under in any circumstances, unless you're running a thermal virus and you're in a hot environment, right? So the base clock is sort of like, no matter what, you're guaranteed to hit that clock. And a lot of people care about that. The boost clock is what's more typical, but it's typical across all parts in all chassis and all applications. This is, typical application. This is the clock that you're going to hit most of the time. Right now, we could say that's our spec and never go above that clock, but the truth is there's lots of things where you're sort of less power sensitive, or maybe you're a less busy part of the game, and monitoring in real time different parts of the GPU, we know we can crank the clock up, but we can't crank the clock up all the time. So that's why you're going to see it vary from clock to clock.
Okay.
Some people have asked us, why don't we just push the GPU clock spec up, right, and have it out of the box without having to do this offset stuff? run higher, that would actually make the population of parts that always work smaller. So our strategy is, we're going to have a big, some variation, and we're going to allow people to build different coolers and different boards.
Right, we've seen that all.
Yeah,
I mean, this EVGA card that we're
what's the spec
giving away, it is, I don't know, it doesn't, they don't list clock speeds on the box.
Oh, really? They don't? Okay, I didn't know.
But it is using their ACX 2.0 cooler, so it is a different cooler already.
Yeah, and it's going to run really, really fast. So that's kind of our strategy. We don't need to squeeze, make things very difficult for our partners to add value.
Right.
All right, so that's basic. It runs great, gives you great performance, GTA 5. In this example, we're getting, 60 frames a second, and we're running at 1.4 gigahertz. All right,
pretty good.
Good enough. All right, let's get out of here, close this up.
So I do want to ask, some of the we've been soliciting questions throughout the week, kind of build up into this stuff as well. So I'm trying to think of ones that are kind of specific to this.
Okay.
Why would you guys have a card that's $650, right? That is so very close in performance in games like this to the Titan X that is out there for $1,000.
Right. The way to think of it as Titan X is going to be for the ultra enthusiast that wants the best of the best. 12 gigs frame buffer. It's going to be some time before games are ever going to really get bigger than 6 gig.
Yeah,
so having 12 gigs gives you that headroom. It is still a perfect GM200. And again, there's going to be people out there that just really, really want the best. Titan X is our attempt to bring that class of performance to a much broader.
980 Ti, you mean?
No, I'm sorry. 980 Ti is our attempt to bring that Titan X class of performance down to a much more cost-effective price point. I mean, still not cheap at $649.
No.
It's a pretty good price, but it gives you a great value. And I've actually seen people plotting that per dollar, and you see that 980 Ti is actually really well positioned on that line. So it's more driven by, okay, we've been in the market now with Titan X for a while. Let's bring it down and raise the volume.
Right. We talked a little bit before the stream about the cooler. So if you look at our demo that we've got over there running, we're actually running the reference version of the 980 Ti. There it is running on our Asus ROG board. Questions have come up about the cooler design and kind of the design here.
Yeah.
One of the comments directly referenced the discussion we'd had on the live stream before about the acoustic experience, and the basic premise of the question is the 250 watt TDP too much of the Titan X and the 980 Ti? Is it too much for that cooler?
Yeah.
Has that cooler maybe outlived its lifespan? Is it time to maybe move on from it?
Fair questions. Well, let's just talk about the games that we've looked at that we're showing. At 250 watts, that cooler is great. It's still basically quiet. I mean, it's not totally 100% silent, but it's basically silent.
I mean, basically, what he's comparing it to, and what I know we've compared it to, is like if you look at the same implementation on the GTX 980.
Yes.
Right, but it has a 165, 180 TDP.
Watt, yeah. So it's 70 watts more.
Yeah.
But that cooler is actually designed to support more than 250 watts. And it is, even though it's not as quiet as 980, it's still effectively silent. However, the question is really a little bit deeper. Are we done? Are there things that can be done? And obviously the answer is no, we're not done. We're continuing to look at new cooling technologies. There's, is 2 slots the right limit? I don't know. Maybe we could go a little bit wider. Maybe we could go taller. If you look at what our partner does, and that's what I really love about our model, where we come out with a base card, but our partners go and they just innovate like crazy. Like EVGX has done some amazing things, ASUS, Gigabyte, everybody.
Yeah.
So I don't think our business is held back by one thermal solution. Clearly there's many, and NVIDIA is going to continue to invest in thermal technology. We're not locked into 2-slot air blowers forever.
Right. Okay. Let's see. I think this actually...
Shall we continue along?
Yeah, I think that might have restarted too.
Okay.
While we swipe along there, why did NVIDIA choose not to include a backplate? This is a very touchy subject for a lot of gamers.
Okay. So we would love to have a backplate on this card. I like backplates. I think they look great.
They look good, yeah.
They give it a nice finished product look to it. But the problem is with a 250 watt part with this blower, if you stack them in 3-way, if you kind of put one GPU right next to another, there's no gaps at all with the backplate.
Right.
And what that does is it causes the middle one and the one next to that to get very hot in a 3-way SLI configuration. If you take that backplate out, there's enough air to get between the GPUs so that 3-way works. Now, a lot of people will say that, well, I'm not running three-way, so I wish I had a backplate.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine, and backplates are available aftermarket from our partners. But we have to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody's an enthusiast that's going to be buying these cards, and we don't want bad experiences for the people that just plug and play, right? Buy three, take it home, plug it in, and it gets very loud. That would be disappointing.
I mean, was it the 780 that had the removable section on it?
Yes.
Would you think, were there people that
980 did, yeah.
Were there people that didn't realize that was removable and it
No,
caused bad
it's
experience,
certainly
or?
removable, but 980 is 80 watts less.
Oh, right.
Okay, so what we actually need to do is we need to have the whole rear part of the backplate removable to get it to work with three-way. Okay. And unfortunately, that's just not the way the card was designed this time. But moving forward, we like backplates. I think you're going to see more type of backplates from us, but we just can't make it work with the existing sort of backplate design that was brought forward from 980 Ti, from 980.
Right.
Yeah, needs a little work.
Okay.
All right, let's shift gears. We're going to go now to DX12. Of course, DX12 is very important for us. Launching this summer, this is a DX12 or Win 10 DX12 PC. And the way we think about DX12 is two chunks. There's the low-level API that is just going to, in general, make games run faster. They're going to have lower CPU overhead, and it's going to be better for everybody. Then DX12 also adds new APIs and new effects that are going to say on some GPUs things are just going to look great, right? So the way to break that down in your mind is, you know, the base D3D DX12 API is low overhead, more control, and asynchronous compute support for applications. But then there's a bunch of key DX12 features that include things like volume tiled resources and conservative raster. Okay, so the way I think of DX12, and I know there's a lot of questions about it, I will try not to answer right now, but levels and tiers, that stuff is just a little bit too complex for this conversation. Suffice it to say that there's a lot of confusion about levels and tiers right now. We're trying to clarify that there's a difference between base level API and then advanced features. And our GPU, GM200, supports a bunch of different advanced features, and I'll show a couple.
Okay. I mean, DirectX, I mean, I guess the confusion started with people immediately thought that DirectX 12 was only going to be the low-level API improvements.
Yes.
But it is that plus
other
additional
stuff.
Features that we're used to seeing introduced as DirectX levels increase.
Yes.
Right, but there's just more complication around what those features are and how they're implemented.
There's a little bit more complication on it, and I think as we get closer to DX12, you'll see more communication on how these GPUs differ and how, you know, what GPU to buy to get which feature. Okay? But right now we just really can't provide a lot more detail than there are a bunch of different features. They're going to vary from GPU to GPU. Our GPU, GTX 980 Ti, and all of our GM20X based designs support all of these guys. So I want to highlight just a couple of those.
All right.
The first one is volume tiled resources. The way to think about this is, again, it's a DX12 feature, and it is effectively memory management. I don't know if I want to call it memory management, but it's demand paging for textures. And you can do that by thinking about a traditional texture. It was just sort of all or nothing. You'd load it up into the memory, it would take up all the space. So big textures take up a lot of memory. Now with tiled textures, you actually can virtually chop that texture up into little tiny pieces, and only the tiny pieces that are getting accessed right now are loaded, right?
Okay.
And so it's almost like a demand page structure for textures. Well, the next level of that obviously is tiled 3D volume render textures. So volume tiled textures adds a third parameter to that. Okay, so again, you can have a region of memory that is now loaded dynamically, and you can use that third parameter for anything, including space. So the demo I want to show you is going to be called sparse fluid simulation, and in this example, we're using that third parameter to model a volume. So it's X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And in the case of this simulation, we're only going to load the little pixels or the voxels that have data in it. We don't load the whole scene. And I'll show this demo in just a minute. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is conservative raster, which again is a DX12 feature. And what it's used for is basically increasing the surface of that's generated during raster. So typically you look at the sample point and you compare it to the three-dimensional geometry, and if the geometry covers a sample point, you would call it green, or an example.
So in this what you're trying to do is you have a shape, you have a triangle, and you are trying to color that in. You're trying to draw it in some capacity.
You're rastering it effectively.
Right, yeah.
And the way it normally works is the center of the pixel where that shows up in that polygon would determine whether it's covered or not. With conservative raster, what we actually do is say, okay, instead of the center, we're just going to use, is it touched? So is the pixels square touched by the polygon? And if it is, it's covered.
Now that looks like it would be significant more work on the API or the GPU to do that.
Well, not really, because if you think about it, at the end of the day, rastering is yes or no decisions for every pixel.
Right.
And so we're just changing the result of the decision a little bit on the edge. It doesn't do more rastering to generate a conservative raster. It just has more decisions during that raster process that end up being covered.
Okay.
So what it does is it basically fattens up a little bit every polygon. Now the reason that's important is for something called ray trace shadows. So to think about it, this is where we have a regular shadow map, and it's got, shadow maps are generally coarse and they're approximate, and you can see they have big jaggies on them. Sometimes we use basically a blur on that to make it look a little bit better, but it still doesn't look great. Ray tracing actually simulates a light, goes through that sort of rastered surface, and then generates a shadow directly based on the ray trace. But if you don't conservatively raster, all these triangles don't quite overlap perfectly, and if you raster them in 3 dimensions tilted, they get little gaps, and that's what these little gaps are. It's the gaps between the rastered surfaces.
So this is not if you have a ray traced game engine as a whole. This is if you're using ray traced shadow generation.
Yes, this is just showing shadows, and again, ray tracing actually does benefit from conservative raster as well, but we like to focus on something we can demo right now.
Right.
Ray tracing with conservative raster, the way to think about it is each of these rendered triangles are now completely overlapping with each other, and you don't get any gaps.
Okay.
Okay, so with those 3 things, I think we show a demo.
Okay.
All right, and this demo is actually pretty cool. It is it's called our mech demo. We just did it, so let's go ahead and load it up. Over here, thank you, sir. Mech coming up.
So this is pretty interesting. This is something I think you guys were first showing at Computex.
Yeah, we just showed last week.
So it's brand new.
It has
as
not
the name
been
implies, there's a
mech
in it.
and it's a DX12 demo. And
right. So this is running DX12.
It is.
So this is why we had to install and run Windows 10. All these things to do that.
Absolutely. And this is our mech real time. I'm going to go to the UI. I'm going to pause him and turn everything off and go to the light.
Okay.
So the way to think about this is we're going to demonstrate a bunch of different features. And I'm going to start off with looking at shadows. Okay, so right now, if you kind of look down on the bottom here, you'll see that.
So the shadow on the ground.
Yeah, that's a traditional shadow, right? It's using a shadow map. And if you look closely at it, it's very harsh shadow. It doesn't look very realistic. And if we look on the mech itself, you see kind of like the very jaggy nature of a shadow map shadow. Like one example is this edge, very, very jaggy. And that's because the shadow maps are generally pretty coarse structures, okay? So to get around that, what we do is we blur it. So this is called a soft shadow, which is basically taking a hard shadow, a regular shadow map shadow, and then just blurring the edges. And
flip back and forth between that a couple times. If people look at the ground shadow on the,
You can see that, hard edges everywhere. And then this is soft. And soft shadow runs a blur filter after the shadow map is generated, okay? Now, instead of doing all those techniques, which are great, we can now do ray tracing in real time. So what ray tracing does is it does a conservative raster, kind of if the light is coming down at this angle, we're going to generate a plane that's rastered this way. And because all the triangles are bloated a little bit, we can use it for ray tracing. We generate this amazing shadow. And the truth of the shadow is it's very accurate based on the lights that are in the scene. It's very, very cool. Now, if we come over and take a look at this guy as well, let's look at a few shadows over here, maybe right there in the guy. Ooh. Okay, looking at the arm down here.
Right, kind of the bottom right of the screen.
If we look at, here's what a hard shadow looks like. You can see all the kind of jaggies and really, maybe just zoom in right there. That's a hard shadow. Soft shadows blur it. Okay, so you kind of lose the shadows in detail on the mech.
So why does that shadow kind of disappear there when you go into soft?
Because it's a very thin shadow line. So looking at this, that is geometry-wise very thin.
Right.
So when it blurs, it just sort of blurs away entirely. Because we have to also blur the big shadows down below.
Right.
So then ray tracing brings all that back. You get nice crisp edges on the mech because obviously it's shadowing itself. Let's look up here on that guy. Whoop. So like looking at that sort of projectile thing, it generates a great shadow there. If I looked at the hard shadow, it's very gridded and kind of looks kind of fake. But the soft shadows blur it out and you pretty much lose everything. You can still see a little bit of that shadow. And then ray tracing works. So I think that is the way DX12 really ought to be doing shadows, using conservative raster to do ray tracing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next topic, which is smoke. I'm going to turn on the shading so we get our good looking mech back. And now let's look at some smoke. Now what we're going to do here is going to start off with a non-sparse simulation. Okay, non-sparse, you can see again we've got some real-time smoke, but what's happening is we're simulating the entire scene in tiny little boxes, tiny little cubes. And so we're basically doing a smoke simulation. You know, how hot am I? How dense is the smoke near me? Should the smoke rise or not? Is the pixel being perturbed? Is motion happening? So all of those effects are modeled on a per cube basis. Okay. And the frame rate, if you look when I kind of spin around, using a full simulation,
it's
pretty low, right? So now we're going to go to the sparse simulation, okay? And sparse, right away you can see everything is nice and silky and smooth again, because now all we're simulating are the voxels effectively that have data in them. Right? You don't have to simulate the whole space. You don't have to, load the whole space.
This is that 3D texture.
This is the 3D tiled textures. Yeah. Okay. Or 3D tiled resources.
3D tiled resources.
Yeah. And so in the third dimension here is vertical. So we're going X, Y, and Z. So it's basically a volume simulation of smoke. Okay. So that's pretty cool. Those are DX12 features using conservative raster and the tiled resources.
Just let it run for a second.
Okay. Now let's turn everything on and show you what the whole party looks like. This is in real time. You can see the smoke is correct. You know, the way that the rockets take off and light the smoke is pretty cool. I think if we zoom around, we can see them doing some really cool stuff out front. I really want to play this demo where I can like aim it.
Right, you got to have something to shoot.
Yeah, you got to have some stuff to shoot. But right now, I think it's a look ahead at just how cool DX12 games can look using the new features. So we call these just advanced DX12 features, and all the tiers and the levels will get more information in the future.
Okay, so people that are trying to figure out if this is DX12.1 or feature level 12 or tier 142,
like we can say we are DX12.1. Okay. But what that means in a detailed level, I think we're going to wait a little bit before, as it gets closer to Win 10 launch, you'll see more information about what's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, cool. So thanks, demo team Curtis. That is fantastic demo.
Yeah, that's cool.
And we are going to continue on back to the slides.
I think the slides restarted again.
Oh man, I gotta stop doing that.
Yeah.
There's a way to do that.
Yeah, I forget if it's the Alt. I think don't hit Escape. Always just Alt Tab.
Yeah. All right, Alt Tab coming up. Okay, so a summary for 980 Ti. So the way to think about it, it's about 3 times the performance of 680 running 4K. And again, remember 980 Ti is all about 4K if you got a 4K monitor. DX, it's 12.1. Memory is 6 gig. Power is 250 watts. And our perf, Shift F5.
All right, go ahead.
Our perf is about 2.3 times perf per watt of our original 680, which was Kepler based. Now, if you remember Kepler, how great that was, power efficiency, when we came out to talk about Kepler 3 years ago, in just that time, it's now 2.3 times the relative perf per watt, which is again Maxwell, just a dramatic improvement. All right, any other questions on 980 Ti?
We have a couple more. Let's see, as I scroll back up through this stuff. Any differences in CUDA support between what the 980 Ti does and the GTX Titan?
No, same CUDA style support.
Okay. So other than the larger memory, maybe being more useful for larger data sets.
Yeah, if you're doing rendering of large, ray trace scenes, and you're doing rendering of that, you could benefit from 12 gigabytes. That just got to be aware that if you go for a 980 Ti instead, it's smaller frame buffer, smaller data sets, and you may see some issues there when you're doing rendering.
Right. Okay.
Moving on.
Yeah.
So GameWorks VR. GameWorks VR is our solution for VR. It's all of our driver stuff, it's all of our middleware, and it's all the techniques that we're applying to make VR better. VR is going to be huge. Next year, I've seen some data that says 5 million headsets going to be sold next year. That's a lot.
That seems improbable to me.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, but you never know, right?
You never know. Bought and then utilization. I want the content needs to be there.
How do you use it? Well, I'm not. The thing I'm not sure about is what is the killer content? Is it games? Is it visualization? Where's it going to go?
I'm really actually excited for E3. Palmer Luckey.
Great guy.
He tweeted out a picture of. There was a character in a movie. Ken, help me with the name of the movie. It's the Nintendo World Championships movie, The Wizard.
Oh, you're kidding.
And there's a character who is known to have a power glove, right? Which is a thing you wear and play the games on it. And Palmer Luckey just tweeted out a picture of that character from that movie.
Oh, neat.
kind of
maybe
teasing some kind of
Power Glove,
some kind of haptic thing.
Wow.
Something.
Well, let me tell you, I did a demo at Computex with a partner, and they had a camera pointed at the person doing the 3D, and the camera sensed your front position and your arms, and effectively you were now in your virtual space. So you have the headset on, but you show up as a white haze, and anybody else in the room shows up as a different color. So you could actually, we had 2 headsets set up playing Tron. So you're throwing the little disc at each other across them. It's crazy. I mean, once you have arms and you're interfacing with it, it really does change things.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about VR and how it works, right? So this picture is trying to give the background for VR. You know, there's an optic, there's a little lens inside of a VR headset. I wish I had one here to show you. Do you have a VR headset?
Yeah, we do.
It's all back in the way? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look inside there, the first thing you see is you're looking through these goggles, right? Now the goggles are there because if you didn't have goggles, you'd be looking at a screen 3 inches from your face. So you need the goggles
to bend
focus
on.
Impossible to focus on. Lots of eye fatigue. So this allows you to relax your eyes and focus. You're going to go grab it? You're thinking about it.
He was thinking about it.
Okay, don't do it.
We can't exactly find it on.
All right, don't worry about it. So that's why the lens is there. It's not because we want the lens there. Yeah. So it is there. That means that the GPU has to generate this. You with me? Got to generate this warped image that's going to go through that lens. Wow, I should never have mentioned it. All right, Ken, what are you doing?
I got it.
He's got it.
All right. Keep explaining.
So there's a warped image that has to get generated because of that lens, and then what happens is your eye eventually sees it straight again.
So the lens is there because of the physical limitations of what you're looking at, a large screen.
Yes. Oh, look at that.
So here we have, this is actually a lens from our DK2 development kit, one of the extra sizes that we've never used.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. So if you open up a headset, you're looking kind of in the front of that.
Yep.
So you can simulate that. There you go. Oof. And that allows you actually to focus very closely. Have you ever done this?
No.
You can take anything and put it in front of it and focus.
Gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
You didn't know that it had many uses.
I gotta get these for my dad. So
there you go, son. Yeah. So that's actually allowing you to kind of relax and focus in the distance. That requires the GPU to generate this warped image, right?
Okay.
But the problem is GPUs don't generate warped images. They generate straight images, right? Yeah. Natively, right? So this is the image, and this I'm going to show you this demo in a second. This is the image that we generate natively, and we have to run a shader program to convert from this big image to a smaller but distorted image. Okay. And this distorted image is what actually goes through that lens to get straightened up onto your eye. Okay. Now the shame part of this and the sad part, for those of you who have thought about this, there's a whole bunch of pixels out here in red that are actually getting translated and warped to this red area, which is a smaller red area than you started with. So that translation and warp actually is losing information.
So you are taking the same image, but you are compressing the number of pixels in space that it occupies. Therefore, you're losing a little bit of detail.
You're losing detail.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So because of that, it also represents an opportunity, right? Why throw out these pixels? Why just not render them? And that's what multi-res shading is all about. Multi-res shading says, let's chop up the picture into regions, and then the regions on the outside, I'm going to render them at a lower resolution and apply a scale factor. So we're no longer going to render this big image where we throw away most of these pixels. Instead, I'll render a smaller image, and these pixels are actually all going to get used as they're rewarped. Okay. And the reason you do this is because, obviously, one, you can use the multi-projection acceleration inside of Maxwell, which is based on multiple viewports. That's what makes it technically possible. But the benefit is 1.3x to 2x improvement in pixel shader performance.
So go back a couple more slides.
Okay.
I want to point out something. One more.
One more.
What I think is important to note here is, like, so you've divided this into 9 regions.
Yep. Each region is called a viewport.
The center viewport maintains the same pixel density.
Yes.
Right? Because that is where player focus is. That is where the majority of the action is going to take place.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that it's
but
much
also
there.
It's not distorted.
It's not distorted in the final image.
In the lens, right? So the lens doesn't distort it, so it needs to have sort of the same fidelity that we generated on the screen. It needs to not be compressed.
But on the sides, this image by itself on the right hand side here doesn't make sense, right? Because you can see if you follow the ledge with the banners on it, how on this side the ledge angles in.
Yes.
And that is because of the compression or the resizing that is being done.
Exactly.
To match what the warp does. Is that right?
It's actually, this compression is being done because the distortion of this lens is higher on the edges.
Okay.
Okay. Now, our warping process understands that this has been compressed differently from this.
Right.
So when we warp, we generate the final image that looks again exactly like we had done the warp from an uncompressed image.
Okay.
Okay, so that's all in words. Let me show you it live. It's a little bit simpler. So I'm going to Alt-Tab out. I'm going to shrink this down, and we're going to pull that up. Oh, see, this is my problem. I don't know how to get out of there without escaping. Oh, but this one might be the secret.
Maybe you had multiple of them
Yeah.
open.
All right, so now we're going to load the multi-res demo.
Okay.
Now this again is in real time, and what we're looking at is exactly that scene. Now normally this would be on a headset. So here's the native rendered image. It's a room. I wish we could move around in it, but this
we
is.
had a headset. We could have done.
Yeah,
this.
we should have. We should have.
Retrospect.
Yeah, well. So this is actually the warp. So we take this full image, we run a shader program on it. This is actually the image that's on that headset.
Right.
And then this image goes through that lens, and it ends up square on your eye. Ooh, actually, that'd be kind of cool, right? Yeah, it's working. It's working. All right. So let's talk about multi-res shading. So in this picture, I can enable multi-res shading, and now we've got this new picture on the right-hand side, and everybody can see it's much smaller than the left.
It's like physically smaller.
Physically
so
smaller.
this is being mapped 1-to-1 across it. Right?
Yeah, so same pixel density. So now I've turned on what we call just some draw split lines, and I'm going to turn it up. So these are the viewports that would have been on the original image, but in the long run, we would no longer render this image, we just render the new image, okay? So I'm gonna really turn up the scale factor because you can kind of have different compression factors. So watch what happens to this image as I turn up compression.
Right.
The side pieces are getting smaller, but the center piece is the same. Okay, so now-
So you can see that through the distortion of the walkway and the,
and the little lines kind of make it clear. So this vertical spacing is now mapped to that vertical space. It's about half. Okay, so the cool part is this image is actually all we're rendering now. We're not really ever in a real game going to render this image. We just rendered this image. That reduces the pixel load by up to 2x, and then this runs another shader program on it to generate that. Okay,
now that shader has to know where you start from because it's different than what was being done
game
before.
engines need to know about this because
so now in theory this should not change as your compression factor changes.
It really shouldn't if we're doing a good job, right? So I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to turn it on and off. So if you watch this image, that's off, that's on, that's off, that's on. There's really no difference. And in your headset, even when you're moving, you can't see it. Now this is with compression set to 100, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. I'm going to change compression. If you watch this, you don't see any change to that as compression is changing, right? And the reason is, again, that the information that's on the edge is being distorted in such a way that it doesn't really matter that much.
Now, so before the 980 Ti launch, I saw a demo of this running with a Crescent Bay headset. It seemed to work great, right? Like it was. The idea was to even try to look for,
look for defects.
Looking for defects, trying to find it. You couldn't really find out. Now there is some data loss with this process, right? But is it just a matter of you're not losing it in the areas that are important for the visual?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, ignore multi-res rendering.
Okay.
There is data lost going from this image to this image.
Okay.
Right, because you need to, this is much bigger, this is much smaller, but this is the image you need because of the optics.
Right.
Okay, so even before multi-res shading, you're losing quite a bit of data. It turns out that most of the data you're losing is on the edge, right? Because the center is unwarped.
Right.
So the center pixels are basically 1-to-1 what the pre-rendered image is.
Okay.
So the interesting part is we recognize which regions are going to lose information, and then instead of rendering it, we do some smart stuff, right? So this is like really, really insightful. Don't render these pixels. Let's allow those pixels to, be rendered in a small space, right? That's what's happening here. That's where we start, and now we're going to shrink it down. Those pixels that are going to become warped, we're just never going to render.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this strip is much smaller than this strip, but if you look at the size of this strip compared to the size of that strip, it's not that far off, right?
Right.
And this strip is quite large compared to this picture.
So this is something that had to be implemented at the game engine level. This is not something you guys can do after the fact in a driver or something?
No.
Okay.
And that's because game engines are now relying on
They
results.
would have to pick what gets put into each of those viewports.
Yeah, well, we could handle the translation, but the problem is they're using, smoke effects and things that are lingering from frame to frame to frame, and they use the results of the prior rendered frame as sort of a data set into the next rendering.
Gotcha.
So unless they understand there's compression in that process, they're going to look crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very cool. That is multi-res rendering, and it is just...
Bring this up, see if that helped us.
Yes, a little bit. Not really. That's the old one.
It did. Now that we didn't open the second one.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, there we go.
So, GameWorks VR, and this was what we talked about, going down. You want to try it? Stick it in there?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
It would have to be the right size.
So is that something you guys have partners on board that are going to build that into their engine?
We are now reaching out to all of the major game guys, the headset guys, make sure they both know about it, and it would be part of our GameWorks VR kit.
Okay.
Okay, now GameWorks VR also includes a bunch of other stuff. Obviously, it's a complete set of APIs and libraries. Multi-res shading is one part, VR SLI is another, where we do, rendering on one eye or the other.
Sure.
One eye on the left GPU, left eye on one GPU, right eye on the other GPU. Context priority, direct mode, and front buffer rendering, all cool technologies that come in GameWorks VR.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. This had a different name before.
It did. I think we called it VR Direct.
VR Direct.
VR Direct was kind of a new kind of different way of naming it. GameWorks VR makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
It's a GameWorks just like all of our other technologies.
All right.
All right, so that makes us the ultimate platform for VR. Obviously, our GPUs are getting faster and faster and faster. Price points are coming down. GeForce Experience is going to be a key part of VR for us as things go forward. Obviously, there's going to be game settings for VR, just like there's game settings for desktops. So I think this will be part of that. And lastly, all of our research library and tools get to game developers and headset manufacturers through GameWorks VR.
Okay.
Obviously, we're working with big folks, Oculus, Unity, Epic, Valve, and Crytek, all used us at GDC. So we're continuing to work with those guys, obviously, very closely. Last topic is G-Sync.
Okay.
Wow, near and dear to my heart. Near and dear. And let me tell you, I got two things I want to talk about briefly.
Okay, I'll allow it.
Okay, and then we're going to talk about this guy.
Okay.
All right, so first of all, everybody knows the challenge of variable refresh by now. You guys did a great article on that. Everybody does a good job on VR, or VRR, variable part, when the frame rate of the game is in what some people call the zone. Okay, if you're in the zone...
I call it the VRR window.
Okay, the VRR window,
Let's go with the VRR
So if you're in the VRR window, then you can be very smooth. The problem is what happens when you fall out of that window. So if the frame rate drops below a certain level, you have to do something. You can either revert to a fixed refresh rate, which is kind of a bad experience, especially if you characterize the transitions, or you can do what we do, which is inside of our G-Sync module, we double or triple the refresh rate, and we still stay in sync. So if you think about that, if the frame rate is dropping from, say, 50 to 30, at some point you're going to transition through the 35 hertz, which may be the minimum refresh rate. And at, let's say we're running 33 FPS, what we'll do is just double it to 66. So we'll do a refresh rate, we'll do a refresh at exactly the right time, and then we'll project forward and do a refresh in the middle of the next period. So it's actually a really simple idea, and it's done by the module.
Okay.
Okay, so we are always in sync, and you've done a great job talking about that.
Yep.
The second thing, which we haven't talked about, but people have been observing, is ghosting. So ghosting is about timing, and I'd just like to give a quick overview of overdrive. Monitors and LCDs all do overdrive, and it's related to this idea that you're at one particular color and you want to transition to another color. You have a certain amount of time. That's the timing of the refresh on traditional monitors. Now, if you drive it to the exact gray 2 that you're trying to go to, you would never actually reach it because of the timing. So instead, you say drive it to gray 3. All of the fact that you're driving to gray 3 means that by the time your time is up, you're at the correct color. That's what overdrive is. You drive an LCD bit harder than the color that you're trying to get to because you only have so much time.
Okay.
Now, it gets more complicated with VRR and G-Sync because it's obviously that variability impacts this color. There's a variable frame time here, so you don't really know, are you going to be early or are you going to be late, because the transition is driven by the next frame.
So it could be if you're early, you don't quite make it to the color, or if you're late, you've made it past.
And it drives too hard.
Right.
And either one of these results is called ghosting. Ghosting is the direct result of incorrectly overdriving a particular pixel.
Okay.
Okay, because if you think about it, if you're here, you're still maintaining some information from the prior frame. And that information, like I'm closer to gray 1 than I should have been.
Right.
That being closer to gray 1 actually maintains that after image of the prior image. Okay.
Right.
So what we do is called G-Sync variable overdrive. And what G-Sync variable overdrive is all about predicting the frame time. So we're going to make a prediction for the next frame, and then we're going to adjust the overdrive on a bunch of different settings to make sure that we get to exactly the correct value. So it's a complex problem, and it relies upon the module to do the correct overdrive accounting for variable frame time. Okay, that's why G-Sync modules are there, and it's also why the G-Sync monitors don't ghost.
Okay, so, but how are you determining what the variable frame rate will be?
Well, the best estimate is what's the current frame rate. Right. So if you just do something simple and say, oh, my next frame time is going to be what my last frame time was, then you can get a very good prediction of what my overdrive value should be.
Okay.
Right? That's a simple.
That seems fairly simple.
Yeah. But you could be more complex. You could be more sophisticated because there's obviously patterns to frame times, and frame times that are changing tend to continue to change.
Right.
Right?
So this is something you guys have actually been doing since the beginning?
It is. It's stuff that's been in the... Can you imagine me coming on this show and having to say, the module's there because it does stuff. It's really cool.
Right.
It really does do stuff. By the way, it does more than this.
I remember you saying it did really cool stuff, and then you wouldn't tell us what it was.
I did, but I did tell you that it doesn't add latency.
Right.
And I did tell you that it doesn't impact performance.
Right.
And it's all true.
So this has been there for me. This is something you guys have
This is not new.
Second generation.
No.
Or any other stuff.
Been there from the beginning.
Okay.
Cool. Moving on. So I mentioned also G-Sync has full performance and no latency impact. It's a look-aside buffer. You guys can measure it. Anybody else can measure it. Using Maxwell GPUs, the performance is identical. So if you look at G-Sync on and G-Sync off, you're going to get exactly the same number across many titles. Now, it is true on the original Kepler implementation of G-Sync, there was a tiny performance hit, because the Kepler architecture didn't have exactly the right hardware to do G-Sync on the output. It's less than 1%, right? And it varies by game. With Maxwell, all of that got fixed, and it is exactly the same performance.
So with Maxwell, zero. And with Kepler,
tiny.
Some, but small. Well, I mean, what would have to change in the GPU to make that difference?
It's really about how does the end of one frame get communicated to our display hardware. The display hardware needs to be able to sort of change instantly to the next frame. And that's just not the way Kepler was designed to work.
Okay.
So it was all software-based, right? Interrupt-based.
Right.
Now it's direct hardware-based.
Okay.
Gamers love it, right? Obviously, G-Sync got amazing reviews. You guys did some great reviews, and we're happy with G-Sync, and we're continuing, obviously, to invest in it. One of the first features we're adding is windowed G-Sync mode. So now with your G-Sync desktops, it works on all existing desktops. So if you have a G-Sync monitor and you've had to play full screen until now you can play windowed games. It's a very, again, I hate to say it's complex, but we're under the covers doing some stuff to the Windows Desktop Manager to allow now the G-Sync apps to take control of the refresh rate of your desktop. Okay, so if you think about this picture, this is actually showing you something called DWM, which is the Desktop
Window Manager.
Yep,
right.
And that's part of Windows. But that application, it's just a normal DirectX application, and it does things like draws borders, and then it says, what goes inside the border is based on the output of another application that's at a different frame buffer. So this is the single application that does something called compositing. Compositing is, there's a bunch of apps that are all having different frame buffers that aren't being shown. This app copies those frame buffer images into its own frame buffer to show it to the screen.
Okay.
Right? So that's why...
Hence the complication.
That's the complication, and that's what Windows are all about, right? So what we do here is if you focus on a particular windowed app, that becomes the source of the render rate for DWM now. And that also drives the refresh rate. So G-Sync just works with windowed mode.
So what what happens to these other applications that are going on in the background when your focus is on that?
So there's only one, right? There's one ring. And that one ring is the app you're focused on. He controls the refresh rate, or she. And
agnostic.
yeah, the app is the guy in charge. Now, every other app is a slave to that render rate. So that means that if these are also 3D apps, you can see stutter in the other apps. Now, if you want to focus on those apps, click on it, and they will get G-synced, right? So it's just that.
So if I'm playing League of Legends or whatever over here in variable refresh, I go and I click over to a browser window. What will I see off, like, in half of this screen?
Yeah,
will I see tearing all of a sudden? Will I see
it won't tear.
Stutter?
You'll see stutter.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason you'll see stutter is because now your refresh rate is either going to be controlled by DWM, which is a fixed refresh rate device. It's 60 hertz roughly, whatever your max refresh rate is.
Okay.
But that render rate is not connected to the render rate of your game. So the interesting part about composition is it's a best effort thing for Windows.
Right.
So it doesn't have to copy every frame that's rendered, and as a matter of fact, it won't, because it's only going to refresh once, so it doesn't need to do many, many copies.
Okay, so it's only copying it. It's only going to request a copy at the refresh rate
of Windows.
Of Windows.
Of
Okay.
DWM, right?
Okay.
So that means that what you're looking at here will never tear because DWM is running in VSync mode, right? And so the copy is always going to be a complete copy of whatever the latest render was. Right, and to get that to tear, you got to do some really bad things. So,
and so the switching back and forth doesn't cause any kind of stability issues or anything like that
should be fine. No, it's just works. And the UI for it is very, very simple. I'll show it in just a second.
Okay.
Okay. The next thing we've added is the ability to have VSync on and VSync off while in G-Sync.
Right.
Okay. So maybe we just show the UI on that, right?
Yeah.
Can we bring this guy up?
Well,
Let's see. Okay, it's up.
Oh, it is.
It's back.
Look at that.
Yeah, so we're going to use this fancy, this is for a friend of mine, fancy mouse. Okay. And we're going to pull up the NVIDIA control panel. It's cool, right?
Now I'm just playing with this
it works, right?
glass, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm pulling up the control panel. Now, in the control panel, the first thing you'll see over here under G-Sync is there's now a new option to enable windowed mode for full screen. So you basically click that button and you'll be able to run windowed mode applications in G-Sync.
All right, hang on a second. Yeah.
Okay, got it?
So that's just the same as the enable checkbox that has been there before, except now you have a little bit more.
A little bit more, and you can enable windowed mode. Yeah, the reason there's an enable disable for windowed mode is because if you're running sort of desktop apps all the time and you don't really want to deal with this, you don't want your desktop to become a slave to some app without knowing about it, right?
Right.
So that is there as a checkbox. The other thing we have, let's say no. So the other thing we've added is this 3D settings page. Come on, baby.
Well, that's been there for a while, but you have some new options.
We have some new options in it. Thank you, brother. All right, so down here, the first thing you'll see is there's this new option called Monitor Technology. And in there, it says G-Sync or fixed refresh. If you have a ULMB-enabled desktop monitor, it would also have ULMB as an option. And you can actually set this per game. So that means that you can say, per game, I'd prefer ULMB, and it will automatically switch your monitor into that mode.
How does that work with monitors that used to require ULMB initialization on the OSD of the display itself?
That is covered here. We're actually using commands that run from the GPU over the DP cable and talking directly to the G-Sync monitor.
Okay.
So the module that's inside there knows how to talk, I think it's called VCP, which is the protocol between, it's running over DP protocol between the monitor and the GPU.
Okay.
And so we're sending it commands that says, hey, ULMB mode. And so right now you can control that directly from the control panel. It's very cool. The last chunk of stuff that's new for G-Sync is vertical sync, right? So now under vertical sync, in G-Sync mode, you can set vertical sync on or off.
Right. And this is something that
you guys requested it.
We've talked about many times.
We had users request it.
It was the ability to, when you go up, your render rate is above your maximum refresh rate of your display.
Yep.
The ability to choose what happens.
Yes.
Enable VSync or disable VSync.
Yes.
Previously, it was VSync.
Yes.
VSync on.
Yes.
Which kept things tear-free, but
Could add some latency.
Could add latency,
right?
Because as VSync does.
Once the frame rate is very high, effectively G-Sync looked like VSync.
Correct.
Right? Now what this does is says if you're a gamer that is particularly sensitive to latency, or you're playing really high Twitch games and you just want the best low latency you can get, you can now set it off. What that'll do is say when the frame rate's very high, I'm allowing tearing, but I'll have very, very low latency. Now, by the way, this won't change what happens at the low end. At the low end, we're still going to remain synced, but we're just going to do frame doubling or frame tripling. There's really no reason to not VSync at the low end.
Okay. So this only affects on the high end,
Right.
above the window.
Yep.
It doesn't change your experience inside the window. Okay.
And at the low end, it doesn't change.
This is what we
at
want.
first. Yeah, and the cool part is, if you think about that low end, you're waiting for your next frame, right? So there's no
reason
latency.
to not show.
Right. There's no reason
yeah.
not to show it in sync, right?
Right.
If you're waiting for that next frame and you show it out of sync anyway, that's kind of nonsense, right? You were waiting. Why don't we just wait a little more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a very cool feature, and I think gamers are going to love it. Now I want to show a quickie demo here, just so people can see that it is actually on and it works. I've got Shadows of Mordor running, and I'm going to start off. Let me come over here a little bit.
Don't block the camera when you do.
And don't lose my mic, right?
Yeah, and
okay,
don't
not
knock
blocking
over the
camera.
drink. There's a lot of no's here.
Okay, a lot of no's. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to try not to hit the stream button. So I'm going to use the Shield controller here. Now, to start off with, I've got a little overlay, and if you look in the right-hand corner, it's got a red V. That red V means I'm in VSync mode. Now, VSync mode, I'm running around 50 frames a second. You probably can't see this on the stream, but
Yeah.
but it's very herky-jerky. And even though you're getting a very high frame rate, you're still synchronizing to a fixed refresh rate panel, right? And that's what's causing that stutter. As everybody knows this from G-Sync. And this is the best experience people get on notebooks today. So if I hit up, now VSync is off, and I'm rotating again. You can see all the wiggling and all the tearing.
Yep.
Again, that's caused because you still now have a fixed refresh. You have a render rate that is asynchronous to the refresh rate, and you're seeing multiple frames at the same time.
Right.
Now the third mode is G-Sync. And hopefully you guys can tell, G-Sync is always in sync. It's running 44 frames per second in the game, and it's running 44 frames per second refresh on the monitor.
Now, I will say, on the stream, it never shows up like it's supposed to,
No,
right?
you can't.
We are looking at a variable refresh display through a fixed refresh camera.
And you're injecting stutter because of that,
We're
right?
encoding it, and then we're sending it to
Yeah.
somebody else's display.
I know.
We've had this laptop here this morning, been playing around with it, and it works.
It's beautiful.
It works.
It's beautiful. This is an ASUS module a monitor.
It's a G751.
Yep, and it is just coming out with G-Sync, and I'll tell you all about it. It's a very, very cool technology. I think gamers are going to love it for
And I
notebooks.
think this has a 75 hertz display.
It does. It does
on
have
it
a
as
70.
well.
I think it's a 25 by 14, 75 hertz, beautiful panel.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah. So let's stop that, and I'm going to close it, and we will continue talking about notebook. Okay.
Okay.
So. It's the ultimate for notebook, obviously, I mentioned. This is actually a fun picture to talk about how it works on notebook, because we've
Right.
had a lot of
There's
questions.
a lot of confusion on this, too.
Right? This is where we started on the desktop. A GPU talked to a scaler, which was inside of a panel. Now, the GPU guy barely knew the scaler guy, and the scaler guy barely knew the panel guy. And the reason that was like that is because this hasn't changed in a long time, right? HDMI, DP, we didn't really need to know any variation of scalars because they all work the same way. And scalars talk to all panels, and they all look good. Scalar guys did the calculations for overdrive on the panels, and it was done per panel, and it never changed. Okay? It was very, very simple world. Life has changed with G-Sync, right? So we needed to provide an end-to-end solution, which means our GPU needed to talk to a new module, which we've developed. Now, I told you about a couple things we had to fix. One was overdrive, had to be variable overdrive,
Right.
and it had to deal with the variable rates that's coming in. That's also what the module does. So we went ahead and invested. We did the module. We sold the module to monitor manufacturers, but we also started qualifying panels. So G-Sync doesn't work with every panel that's out there. It's only certain panels that have very good responses to variable rates that we can do overdrive with. We check all of this stuff out in Garrett's team at NVIDIA. You spoke to him a couple times. So Garrett makes sure that every single panel that's in a G-Sync monitor is fully qualified.
So there are panels that you guys have, you don't have to name specific ones,
Yes.
but ones that have come in that you have declined.
Yes.
What traits would those panels have?
Ghosting is a big one.
Like you're unable to do the overdrive in the way you want?
We cannot compensate for variability of the panel.
Okay.
Right?
And variability of production of the panel.
Or just the way that the panel pixels transition, right? There's times when you just cannot find a collection of overdrive that works for all colors. Because if you remember, this is panels working for colors. It's another reason it might fail is because the color gamut's not good.
Gotcha.
Right? Because you want the picture to look realistic, and we want the G-Sync panels to look great. So there's a lot of them that are rejected primarily for color. Some are response time. Some are you can't get good overdrive. Okay. Now this is fortunate for us because now we're in the same model with the notebook. We pick the panels that are now connected directly to the GPU. So we don't have to have a G-Sync, kind of a G-Sync module in the way. Because the panel talks directly to the GPU, we can do all the same stuff that we're doing in the module, we can do it on the GPU. Now, people have asked me, okay, wait a second, this picture is a different rotation of this picture, but not that different. Well, the truth is this picture has a scaler here. Right? So that scaler needs to know what to do. And when we did the G-Sync module, it didn't, and it still doesn't. So the panel here doesn't need to do that because we can actually connect it directly to a GPU. There is no scaler.
So does the GPU handle all the function that the scaler did before?
The G-Sync module, yeah. On a notebook, there's less sort of other related scalar function needed. So you're right. On a notebook, you can actually connect it directly to the GPU. We do overdrive calculations on the GPU, right? We do frame doubling on the GPU. So these don't ghost and they don't stutter. They're always in sync.
So feature-wise, this mobile G-Sync laptop will have the same, like you still won't have a minimum refresh rate,
right?
Like, or you'll still be variable all the way down to 0 or 1 or whatever, right? And it will still overdrive?
It does overdrive. It uses the GPU because the GPU has a frame buffer, and we know the values of the last rendered frame.
Yeah.
Right? So we actually run a shader to calculate the values of the next frame, right?
So you basically the last thing is before, so you have to keep the values of those pixels. You know the values of the upcoming pixels. You say, I know what this monitor is.
I know the characteristics of the panel. So you can do the
characteristics of the panel itself. So you do the math in terms of what to actually drive to it. So in reality, you're actually not sending
the native
image to the panel.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the cool thing is, come back to this picture, right? There's a lot of things that this guy has to do.
Right.
And this guy has to know about that guy, and he also has to know what this guy's doing. So that's
to do variable stuff
to get the right colors, to avoid stutter, to get ghosting to work. That is exactly the reason that we do end-to-end, right? End-to-end means that if it stutters, if there's ghosting, if there's a problem with your G-Sync set, then it's NVIDIA's problem, right? NVIDIA will need to fix the driver, will need to fix the module. Maybe we have an error in the panel, but at the end of the day, we're guaranteeing the quality of G-Sync.
So the people that still look at this next slide with the laptop and say, see, they never needed a G-Sync module.
They are, everybody's entitled to an opinion. I can tell you that we needed a G-Sync module, and we still do.
Do you envision eventually one day not needing a G-Sync module?
You know, I never say never. I never say never, but we're going to continue. Let's take a look at this picture again. We're going to continue to make this module better. And we're going to add new technologies, we're going to add new features, and this is just a great way for us to take that to the market quickly and then optimize the GPU through the module to the panel. Now, in the long run, this is a nice model, right? It would be nice, but we're not going to be able to do everything. You know,
that's harder to do on a desktop.
It's harder to do.
I guess somebody could sell monitors that have no scaler.
Yeah. It's harder though, right?
Yeah.
It's not clear that everybody wants a desktop with no scaler.
Right.
Right. You got to do an OSD. There's things that a desktop does. That
There's no SD on a laptop.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
So
okay.
It's not impossible, but it's not in the plans. Okay, so that's G-Sync. And the last thing I want to mention about this end-to-end is we get to pick the displays for the notebooks.
Right.
So that means they're going to have good quality color. They're going to have the right gamut. They're going to get tuned and selected at NVIDIA.
Does that mean every G-Sync notebook is shipping with the same panel?
No, they're all different. Oh, they're not all different, but the way to think about it is they're all qualified,
Okay.
which means that every
So then they get
G-Sync
to pick from that qualification list?
No, the way to
essentially?
think about it is if you're an OEM and you want to do a G-Sync notebook, you say, hey, this is the panel I want to look at. We're like, great, send us a panel. So they send us a panel, we check it out, and then we say, you know, we love that panel. It's got a lot of great qualities, but have you looked at this?
Right.
Right, because we're worried that this won't be a great experience. And usually that's a dialogue that ends up with, let's find a panel that's better.
Right.
Yeah, it's not that we're controlling the panel or the OEM or anything like that. It's more, think of us as a partner trying to make sure that the great experiences that we got on desktop are delivered on notebook.
There are always going to be people that vehemently believe that it's a DRM key for the module, and maybe the same thing for that. But I think all the users can appreciate the idea of what you just said here. If something doesn't work with G-Sync, it's our fault.
It is our fault.
It's your fault. Like it's not the panel guy necessarily.
No, we said that panel should work,
right,
and we did the tuning with our driver. And if it's not giving you a great experience, then we missed something, and we'll fix it.
Okay.
That's a nice way for this system. This one is really complex. If something's broken, the OEM is the person that you want to blame, right? I bought the monitor from this guy,
right?
But it's got a scaler in there that doesn't know much about this, and it's got a panel that maybe hasn't been set up to do this either. So this system has at least 3 players here that could be at fault. And then of course there's this guy. Now this guy could say that it's all over here.
Right.
And this guy could say it's all over here. Now that's not going to happen with us. With us, if it's a problem, we will debug it, we'll fix it.
So if I get an Asus or an Acer G-Sync monitor and it does something I don't want it to do, it's your fault.
Call me. Call me and I'll call Garrett.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All
okay. Right. So that's G-Sync, and I'm very happy. Oh, by the way, these are the first 75 hertz notebook gaming displays because of that process. So these, all the notebooks right now are running 75 hertz or better.
Out of the box.
Out of the box. Great color. Everything's great. There's 4 people that are launching different models. There's 12 total models that launched around Computex time. They're coming to market with different resolutions, different time frames. There's 4K at 60. There's 1080p at 75. There's actually, I think there's a bunch of these that are higher frequencies than that. Yeah, very cool. This is desktop. Obviously, we're continuing to work on G-Sync on the desktop. There are 7 new models that got launched at Computex.
Did you bring any of these with you?
I did not, but talk to these guys, right? The one I really like, did you see the 34-inch yet? It's amazing.
No.
The Acer 34-inch G-Sync curved ultra-wide.
Yeah.
It uses IPS. It's running.
There's also pictures of it from Computex.
It's great.
See it.
It's stupid good. And it looks great.
75 hertz, 34 by 14.
Yeah, it's nuts.
IPS. Yeah.
So I'm really excited. G-Sync, I think, has kind of changed and reinvigorated the monitor market, and we're going to continue to.
That's definitely the case.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Summarizing. G-Sync. It is G-Sync always synchronized, frame doubling, frame tripling, variable overdrive built into the module, and now in the driver for the notebook. It's of course G-Sync supports SLI, so you can have 2-way, 3-way. It supports surround multi-monitor. We did the G-Sync demo here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's very cool, right?
3 G-Sync monitors. And we need to get 3 of those curved ones.
You do. Although, how would you put them together?
3-way SLI.
Yeah, but what would you do? Would they curve this way?
Yeah, you get them. You get like
it'd be like a dome.
Yeah.
You know what I want is the other way, sort of like this.
Yeah, but can't you just do 9 and do 3 and
9.
stack 3?
I don't know if it would be 9. That'd be cool though, right? Could you build a bubble?
You could. I mean, you got to have a system to drive it.
Yeah, so maybe this is the right time to talk about the game that I'm playing because of this.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so
that would do well for you.
Yes, it would.
What is your current game obsession?
My current game, and Tracy will know this, Tracy's my girlfriend, I have a bit of a problem right now with Elite Dangerous. Yeah, so I'm still early in the game, but I've been saving up.
You've been nerding out. And
I've been nerding out. I got the
Saytech.
Is it Saytech?
Saytech.
Saytech. Yeah. I love that joystick, by the way. It's got the HOTAS
throttle.
HOTAS. Yeah, very cool. Hands-on throttle, and yeah, it's a stick. Oh, hands-on throttle and stick. Yes, thank you. And it's really cool. So Elite Dangerous, but I have right now a 4K surround. And I'm going up to 4K G-Sync surround.
4K surround?
Yeah, baby. It's awesome.
Man.
It is awesome.
All right.
All right, moving on. So summarizing, play the future on your desktop. DX12 is coming very soon. GameWorks VR continues to make great games, and you're going to continue to see more GameWorks from us. And 4K G-Sync. So desktop is awesome. Notebook is also now awesome with G-Sync on the notebooks. Of course, GameWorks VR is coming, and DX12 gaming. So whether you're a desktop guy or a notebook guy, pushing the ball down the court.
All right.
What do you think?
It's good stuff. We maybe have known about G-Sync on the notebook since about January that it was coming.
You know, I thought we did good when we said that is in fact coming.
Well, you couldn't really deny it at that point. You didn't really have an option.
I felt like we could have denied it, but it would have been awkward.
It would have been
a lie.
It would have been a lie. Whether or not it was awkward, it would have been wrong. So we do have some more questions I'm going to get to as well. Quick reminder here for people who maybe showed up late. We are giving away
GTX.
An EVGA GTX 980 Ti, the SC edition super clocked.
Sweet.
So if you go to the URL you see on your screen there, which is pcper.com/980 Ti livestream, there'll be a little form you can fill out and answer some questions, and then I will draw one of those if you've got the answers correct. And
we mentioned that I am playing Elite Dangerous.
Right, which was the mystery question.
In my room late at night.
Right, with his joystick.
With my joystick and my throttle.
If you know what I mean. So let's get to some questions, because I think there's a lot of them in here. We're not be able to get to all of them. Considering AMD just demonstrated a variable refresh rate over HDMI, does NVIDIA have plans to develop G-Sync for HDMI? We've saw at Computex that there are some monitors that have both DisplayPort and HDMI on it. Does that mean it's already there?
Yeah, great question. So I've mentioned, I think right at the beginning, that there's nothing about DisplayPort that is special for G-Sync. Right? G-Sync could work on any interface that allows the module or the GPU to control and communicate variability. Right? And it turns out that HDMI does have exactly the same capability built into the spec that DP has, which is variable blank extension.
Right.
So
that's not necessarily the adaptive sync stuff. It's just VBlank as a way of sending a refresh to a...
So that's another important thing to mention. What the adaptive sync spec says as part of DP 1.2a, it's a set of protocols on how to communicate the capabilities of the monitor.
Right.
It's not VBlank extension. VBlank extension is part of DP 1.2a. It's been there for years.
Right.
And this is a kind of a little bit of a confusion, right? Now the question is, could we do HDMI? The answer is absolutely yes. Would we do HDMI? The answer right now is probably no. And the reason is because there's no reason to, right? There's no reason to do HDMI because there's no sources that are HDMI variable, right? If you're connecting to a GPU, you're connecting to a GPU that does VRR, it's going to have DP, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that DP GPU is going to connect over DP to the monitor. And doing HDMI, all that would do is allow people to use a different type of cable. And I don't see a point in that right now for us.
So what about those monitors that people saw at Computex that do have a DisplayPort connection and an HDMI connection?
That I would expect is a fixed interface HDMI, fixed rate HDMI, primarily there for other types of devices, right, that are not variable rate. So if you got a camcorder, you're connecting up another data source or a DVD player or something like that, then those are all fixed rate. Right. So there's no need to have a variable.
So in those monitors, the HDMI port is not a variable refresh capable port.
No.
Okay. It's just there for convenience and other connectivity.
You know, we heard from some of the monitor ODMs or monitor OEMs that it would be nice if people could connect with the cameras, connect up other stuff. Right. But that does not mean that we couldn't make it variable. It's just that it doesn't need to be variable right now.
Gotcha. We've already answered these questions about with the possibility of G-Sync without a module on the desktop. I think we've addressed that.
I covered that, I think. Haters are going to hate. Haters are going to hate.
So, and also, is with G-Sync Mobile not supporting a module, how did it handle below the VRR window? We basically said it does frame doubling.
Exactly the same
but
as
on the
desktops.
GPU.
On the GPU using the frame buffer, and it doubles or triples based on the render rate.
Does that add any overhead to the GPU, like where it has to keep track of more data?
Think of it as a look-alike. It does. We have that buffer, right, all the time.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not really adding that buffer. It is adding a little bit more calculation time, but it's not measurable to do the overdrive calculation.
Right.
So if you think about it, overdrive has to be render, compare, calculate, update the render, and then out. So that does add a little bit more latency, but that I'm going to claim is not 0, but it is like 0.00 something.
Does G-Sync work with dynamic super resolution? Does it work with Optimus?
Yes, no.
Yes with DSR.
Yes.
not an Optimus
Yes.
thing.
Yeah, Optimus is where we connect the laptop display to an Intel GPU.
Right.
And that would mean that the way that works is we render into our own frame buffer and then copy it to the Intel frame buffer. It's kind of like composition, right? But the control of the refresh is the Intel GPU.
Okay.
So there's no way
Right.
for us to work through the Intel GPU controlling the refresh rate. Now we'd like to get that working, or we'd like to make the difference so that you don't need it either way. Right.
Right.
But right now it's an A or B, G-Sync or Optimus.
Okay. Okay. Is that something you get to decide?
Well,
on
they're different.
the fly software?
No, there's different.
It's a hardware change.
Yeah, because the panel connects directly to the
To
discrete
the
GPU.
gotcha.
Right. Now, it is true. Why do you want Optimus? What is Optimus for? It's primarily about
Power
power.
savings. Yeah.
Right. So our power right now on desktop is, on discrete is very good compared to Optimus, but it's not as good. And then our long-term focus is to make it as good or better than Optimus.
Okay. Okay. We'll ask this here. It's
Bring it.
touchy subject.
No,
here.
it's not. It's not.
GameWorks, Hairworks, Witcher 3,
Yes.
all that stuff. Decoy 11 had a question here about the past few weeks. GameWorks and physics sparked outrage. Blame for performance issues of Witcher 3 and Project Cars. AMD put up a video talking about the proprietary black box code. Do you have any? Does NVIDIA have any comments on that? Is it?
I mean, nothing's changed for us. I think that Witcher is a great game. I think it's on its way to being Game of the Year. It's just a fantastic game, and GameWorks has made it a better game. The look and feel of the hair is amazing. The animals look real, and they have great performance. Now, the truth is, there's a question about how much control over that experience do users need. But tessellation is a incredibly complicated science. It's not just a scale factor, right? Tessellation
Right.
factors are used for how many hairs per inch, right? And how many curves per hair, and then is the water different from the hair on the animal, and what about tessellated shapes that are in the distance versus, it's very complex. And all of that tuning is done by our team for the artwork. So at the end of the day, GameWorks continues to be a critical way for us to deliver the best visual experiences. And if we didn't have GameWorks, the technology would not exist. It's not like somebody else would do it. So I don't view it as a negative. I think it's a huge positive, and we're going to continue to invest in it. It doesn't inhibit the ability of anybody to have reasonable performance on day of launch. As an example, if you can do a driver a couple weeks later or a couple months later, whatever it turns out to be, to make Witcher run better on your platform, then you could have done that driver day of launch. You just didn't, right? So
Yeah.
to blame NVIDIA, and I think that's a little disingenuous, right? You need to do work yourself to make your customers have great experiences.
Right. The argument will always go back and forth about, is NVIDIA trying to purposely withhold some of that stuff
Yeah.
to make it more difficult for
No.
the competition?
Yeah, I think of it more as the competition is going to do what they're going to do, and they have a set of priorities that they're working through, and obviously there's a limited total resource pool to do things. So sometimes they're going to be focusing on one thing, sometimes they're going to be focusing on another. All we can do is make sure that we focus on what's required for great games on the day of launch. That means we've got a whole process to do WCL drivers and to do day of launch drivers.
Right.
It's a huge investment, and it's very difficult. So somehow to claim that we are inhibiting the other guy from doing that same work doesn't make any sense, because obviously it's possible to be done, right? You can't claim we can't do it and then a couple weeks later have a driver that does it. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay. All right.
That's my take on it.
All right. I have had more conversations with more people at both AMD and NVIDIA about driver development, dev relations, probably in the last 3 weeks.
Wow.
Than I think I've had in my entire
And have they been delightful?
career. Some of them have not been delightful, to be perfectly honest. On both sides
I
of
hope
that
that we're
table.
delightful.
Sometimes not. On both sides of that,
No.
it's.
Well,
it's,
I think we're
We're
be,
working on getting all of that stuff ironed out to
Good.
have more talks
Good.
on that specific thing.
I think
It's
actually-
clearly something people are interested
Yes.
in and passionate about.
I think having, and I know we've talked, or you've talked about having us explain more about what that workload is and how that works. Right?
Yes, I think that would be a for me and for viewers and readers is like explain what goes into making a driver for a game.
Yeah.
A brand new game like The Witcher 3 comes
Oh my
out.
God.
How much work did you do to
Yeah.
get up to that point?
Yeah.
And then where do you fall behind?
Right.
What are things that you can do better? And I think that would help
Yeah.
people understand that it's not maybe as simple as they want it
Right.
to appear.
Well, I mean, one example is we have a top titles database that has a list of all the top titles that are coming, like literally years out. And the key statuses of our driver development related to that title. That work starts, when the title starts. And it continues for a long, long time until finally day of launch. It's like, not can we get a new driver together? It's like, what version of the latest sets of optimizations are going to be the set that go into the latest driver?
Right. Let's see, Barry wants to know, with the era of Thunderbolt 3 dawning, that's a nicely worded.
Era of Thunderbolt 3 dawning.
Does NVIDIA think there's a possibility for true portable, swappable external graphics cards in the near future? How might DX12's multi-GPU options make this more or less desired? Then there's more there.
Okay, so I don't think, let's talk about DX12 first. I don't think it's related very much to DX12's multi-GPU stuff.
Okay.
Because multi-GPU is going to be low-level APIs that enable game developers to do multi-GPU cooperation.
Right.
And that work is complex and it's large. So I would not expect that to be done for external graphics for games anytime soon. So that's DX12. Is it a useful technology, and will it be coming soon? I don't know. I'm not able to tell the future on that. I think it'd be kind of cool because notebooks are great, and if I can take a thin and light notebook and plug it into a thing when I want to game, that would be pretty cool.
I think so.
Yeah, but whether that's going to be the way that graphics are delivered in the future, I think it's unclear. A lot of people want to game mobile, and that does not work with sort of an external graphics.
No, I mean, that's not ideal for there, but it is for I want this to be my primary machine, and then
Get home and
I
plug
also
in.
want to game,
Yeah.
take advantage of the CPU horsepower in that, even though it doesn't have
Yeah.
much GPU horsepower.
Yeah. I can see it. I don't see it as big, and I don't see it as a big focus for us, at least right now, but you never know.
Let's see. There's just a huge list of stuff here.
I know.
And I'm looking through most of it because I think we've addressed
Yeah.
a lot of it.
But there's some good ones in there. Just rip it out. Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Don't hold back, brother.
Is it true that NVIDIA wants all GTX class laptops? This comes from Cataclysm ZA. All GTX class laptops in the future to pack in panels that support G-Sync. This has been said by PC Per and AnandTech, but haven't seen a source from it.
That is an excellent clarification I want to make. So when we were in New York, I showed you G-Sync, and I think I said something like, I'm going to paraphrase because I didn't record it. I think all future GTX laptops should or could have G-Sync. We're not forcing G-Sync anywhere, right? G-Sync will or will not be in future laptops based on demand from users and OEMs. What I mean and what I believe is that when you see G-Sync on a notebook and you compare it to the same notebook without G-Sync, it's dramatically better. It's like night and day better, kind of like G-Sync was, right? So I cannot imagine a reason, since the cost of G-Sync is approximately zero. Right? There's no scaler. There's no
module.
There's no module, right?
Yeah.
There's no huge extra cost. So I would not expect an OEM to ship or to want to ship a GTX class notebook without it in the future. However, that doesn't mean they can't, or that we're somehow forcing it.
Okay.
What I meant to say, and I think we're clarifying for you and AnandTech and others, my statement was more an aspirational statement of mine. And it's also like it's also like, I can't understand why anybody would not do this, right? That's
right.
Yeah. But we're not forcing it.
Trying to think some of this DX12 stuff is in here. From Nevzim, will DirectX 12 make game-specific driver optimizations less important?
That's an excellent question. Again, what's his name?
Nevzim.
Nevzim. Excellent question. I don't think so. I think game-specific optimizations for DX12 are going to be just like they were for DX11. We're going to have to do drivers that are day-of-launch drivers for DX12. There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
And it doesn't seem to me that the dynamic of tuning an application and tuning a driver is going to change.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe sometime in the distant future all this stuff will settle down and there won't be as much variability on how games implement graphics, but today there's a lot of variability, and we can make subtle improvements in our driver to make them run the best, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
All right. Let's see. Any comment? This comes from Decoy11 again. This is the second question.
It's a follow-up to an unrelated.
This is not a follow-up to anything, but it's another controversial thing.
Damn, Decoy.
There was comments on the internet and on forums about Kepler performance not seeing improvements as these new drivers have come out in relation to what Maxwell's performance have improved. And essentially, in his credit, he's like, is there any answer for this? And also, why do you think people are quick to believe NVIDIA would do that on purpose?
Wow. So let me answer the first question, which is there any, is it true or was there a purpose or?
Yeah, like, why? Any response to it? Why would that happen? And
for that specific case that he's referring to, it was a bug that we found and that was communicated through our forums. And we found a bug. It was a high priority bug. They were working on fixing it and we've already put out a driver for it. So Kepler is not off of our support radar. Obviously, the bulk of our customers are using Kepler, and we continue to optimize it and make it get better. If you run a game today on today's driver, it runs better than last year's driver on Kepler. A lot faster. In the specific case, which I believe was a Witcher 3 example, we did miss an optimization for Kepler that we've since fixed, and we're going to continue to do that. It's part of our QA process, and we just missed it. Now, why do people believe that? I cannot comment on that. I mean, we are not leaving behind. Kepler is a hugely important part for us. It's a hugely important customer base for us.
Right.
And you know, I think people are just scratching around there. They're trying to figure things out. And a lot of it is communication. I think if you think about how you communicate with a company like NVIDIA, a lot of people feel passionate about it, right? This is my thing. I'm playing my game.
Right.
And so there's a relationship there, and I don't think we quite communicate enough directly so that people kind of know who we are and they feel comfortable. They can go to our forums and they can interact. We monitor our forums intensely, and it's not that we can always respond and always fix things, but we have a whole list of bugs that is just from our forums.
Right.
And we're working through those as quickly as we can with our massive software team. But there's just lots of work to do.
Okay. I think that's going to be it.
All right.
We're going to finish up. We're going to go ahead and draw for our winner.
Wow.
The VGA, the site seems to be working fine.
Nice.
And we've got our winner picked out.
Nice.
And
correct answer.
They answered the question correctly.
Wow.
I guess we'll give last name. This is the winner was the 4,390th entry.
Wow.
Ryan H. in Stillwater, Minnesota.
Ryan
H. from Stillwater, Minnesota wins this GTX 980 Ti from NVIDIA and EVGA. I want to thank everybody for attending the live stream today. This was fun. It was interesting.
We talked a lot.
It was a week later than we'd like to do it normally.
Well, I was in Computex.
I know.
Yeah.
Don't be out of the country.
It's always good to see you. Ken, great job.
Good job, guys.
Alan, you doing good over there?
Oh, he's doing fantastic. He must have headphones on. So thank you guys again for joining us. If this is your first time attending a live event, make sure you go to pcper.com/subscribe. You can sign up for the mailing list there where we talk about all these types of things. We do a podcast once a week. We do things like this as well. We're also giving things away on a fairly regular basis.
You do give a lot of stuff away.
Yeah, we actually have a running contest we're giving away right now, 2 40-inch 4K monitors.
Wow.
You guys can go to pcper.com and find that out if you're on the stream and don't know about it already.
That's really good.
So with that, we'll finish up, guys. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, brother. Good to see you.
Bye.